During the worst of the pandemic, did misinformation spread as far and wide online as many feared? You might be surprised by what those crunching the data have discovered. And we're joined now by someone working on just that. From Oxford, England, Sasha Altai, postdoctoral research fellow at Oxford University's Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. And Sasha, it's good to have you on our program. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's just start with this. How do you and your peers define untrustworthy content?
Yeah, so it's a very tricky question. And to do that, we relied on a company called NewsGuard. They employ a team of journalists and editors to rate news outlets on 9 journalistic standards of credibility and transparency, such as whether they use deceptive headlines, whether they publish false content, and whether they correct errors. And to give you an example, the New York Times and the BBC are considered very trustworthy, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you find some countries had a bigger problem with this than others, and if so, which ones?
Yes. So first, to give you a scale of the project very quickly, we tracked web traffic, so the visit to news outlets, and Facebook engagement with 4,000 news outlets in 4 countries between 2017 and 2021. And what we find is that untrustworthy news outlets, so news outlets with weak standards of journalism or weaker standards of journalism, are way more popular in the US and France than in Germany and the UK.
And why would the US and France be worse than the other 2 countries?
It's a very difficult question, because one hypothesis would be that strong public broadcast service, such as it's the case in France or the UK, could be a shield against weak journalism, if you may wish. But because we see high levels in France, it's not very clear. We know that political polarization in the US is bad. We know that France, we have like some societal problems. We had a lot of strikes, and so it's a difficult question.
Understood. Everybody wants to know about Facebook. How problematic did you find Facebook during the course of your investigation?
Yeah. So to give you some numbers, untrustworthy news outlets, they captured 2% of web traffic, but 14% of Facebook engagement with news outlets, Facebook pages. So it's much bigger. But again, we see big differences between countries. In France, news outlets, untrustworthy one, they accounted for 25% of Facebook engagement, but in the UK, it was only 2%. But we need to be careful about how to interpret engagement metrics on Facebook. People can engage with news on Facebook for a variety of reasons, and it does not mean that they agree or believe it. People do a variety of things on Facebook.
Well, that was going to be my next question, which is, do you get the sense that people are troubled by the fact that maybe a disproportionate amount of what they're reading on Facebook is actually not empirically provably true?
Yes, there is a lot of work showing that people are very skeptical of the news they encounter on social media, and people are very skeptical of news they find on Facebook.
Okay,
so people are worried about that.
But I guess the question is, are they more worried about news that's clearly fake from a phony website, or are they equally as worried about news that they would read in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc.?
Hopefully, people are still more skeptical of news from untrustworthy news outlets. So people can distinguish between basically trustworthy news outlets they know and they trust, and news outlets they don't know and don't trust. And many studies have shown that people don't really trust hyper-partisan or fake news websites.
And do you find that encouraging?
Yes, I think it's very encouraging. But there is also a general tendency that in many countries, people don't trust the news very much, regardless of whether it's true or not. People are today very skeptical of the news. It's at least one of the big findings in the recent years at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, where I work.
Okay, Sasha, it is sort of conventional wisdom that there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation on numerous websites throughout the course of the last 2.5 years related to COVID-19. And I guess some people were calling it an infodemic to go along with the epidemic. And I want to find out from you whether you think our fears about the infodemic were accurate or overblown.
I think they were clearly overblown. And I think the infodemic metaphor misses the big picture. Sure, there was misinformation and there was more misinformation during the pandemic, but there was also much more reliable information. And when we look at what people actually consumed during the pandemic, we see that people largely ignored news outlets with weak standards of credibility, and they instead turned to news outlets with the strongest standards of credibility.
And do you take any encouragement from that?
Yeah, I think it's very encouraging. And I think often we underestimate how reasonable and how smart people are. In psychology, we have this thing that's called the third person effect. It's the idea that we think that others are more gullible than we are. They are more influenced by ads. They are more influenced by campaigns. And basically that people are a bit stupid, but that's not the case. On average, people are moderate. People are quite smart. And when they need to learn about something new, they go to good news outlets, not to bad ones.
In which case, where do we get the impression, because I think it is a very strongly held impression, where do we get the impression that people were just swimming in bad information, believing bad information, drowning in bad information?
I think our attention to the problem of misinformation has increased, but we should not forget that, Trump, who made popular the term fake news in 2016, he used it to discredit the news media and make people more skeptical of reliable information. The problem is that if people don't trust the news or don't follow the news, then Trump can do whatever he wants and people won't hold him accountable for his mistakes. So I worry that, by saying that misinformation is everywhere, and I think that's something the media to some extent have pushed, we risk making people more skeptical of everything, including the news coming from the media.
So is the big takeaway from this then that we should remember that large numbers of people still want reliable information from good sources, and they will follow it when they feel they've read it. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's especially more the case when they need to make important decisions, such as decision to vaccinate, or when their decisions will have a clear impact on their lives.
Okay, what does your research reveal about the desire of people to get outside their echo chambers? Because again, this is one of the things we hear, that people only want to stay in their echo chambers, they only want to hear things they agree with, and they don't want to hear conflicting views. What did you find on that?
First, I must say that most experts in the field would agree that fears over echo chambers and filter bubbles are overblown. Offline, we are more likely to befriend with people who share our values and political opinions, and the same happens on social media and online. The thing is that instead of increasing exposure to like-minded content, social media may actually increase exposure to content we disagree with, which can be quite unpleasant sometimes, But if anything, there is a large study in 17 countries that suggests that during the pandemic, people actually consume more ideologically diverse content rather than more like-minded content. So again, I don't think we should worry too much about that, because there are many studies that are not covered a lot maybe in the media, but that show that people have quite moderate and quite diverse news diet. And so I don't think, these fears are, I think, largely overblown.
Your research exactly seems to suggest that a lot of the deep fears that many people have had about how terrible things have been is not actually the case. And I wonder if you get a lot of pushback from people who say, I don't care what your research says. My sense of it is that it's all terrible out there.
Yes. But this thing about it being all terrible, people say that on social media, we are in filter bubbles, we are in our own echo chambers, but at the same time, it's all terrible. And it cannot be, these two narratives cannot be true at the same time. Social media and the internet cannot be a terrible place where we find offensive content, and at the same time, people are in echo chambers. It cannot be. So there are also, I think, a lot of inconsistencies in the alarmist narratives that we hear, is that they are not even consistent between each other. And I have some pushback, but I think experts are converging toward a clear consensus that, echo chambers are overblown, and even people who 5 or 10 years ago were convinced are now convinced that it's not a big problem.
Well, my gut has always told me that you're right, but I just hear so much conflicting evidence that I have not trusted my gut, but I'm glad to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah. I hope that the truth will come out. I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but it's true that alarmist narratives are very popular for, it's very attractive to our mind also we think that things are terrible, that poverty is increasing. We have a lot of misconceptions about the state of the world.
Absolutely.
And we have this negativity bias that I think is very strong, even in the news. There is a strong negativity bias. And,
Tell me this. I know Canada was not one of the countries that you studied, but I wonder if there are any lessons. We're on a Canadian channel, obviously. Are there any lessons for Canadians here that you think would be useful?
Yeah. So I must say I'm not at all an expert of the Canadian media ecosystem, but my guess would be that it cannot be worse than the US. So I'd say it's very likely that Canadians also turned to more reliable news outlets during the pandemic. But I'd be less confident, to extrapolating our findings to Asia, Africa, or South America. But I think to Canada, it's fine. I'm pretty sure that it's also the case. But there are very few actually studies on that. So it could be otherwise.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think most people watching this program would agree with you that we're not as badly off as the United States when it comes to political toxicity and so on.
Yes.
We're more than we want to be, but not as bad as the United States. But the fact that sort of 90% of the people in the province in which we're broadcasting right now went out and got vaccinated suggests that they heard the experts and agreed with the experts and followed suit. So that's encouraging, I guess?
Yeah, and overall, when you look at what people did during the pandemic, they did the right thing, even if sometimes elites and the government were, communicating in maybe confusing ways, and sometimes they were contradicting themselves, etc. So even if elite communication was not always perfect, I think the people were quite reasonable during the pandemic.
Sasha, you have given us one nugget of something to be somewhat enthusiastic about, which I'm delighted to hear. And we're very grateful that you could spare some time for us on TVO tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.